What if a single decision could turn a routine dive into a nightmare? Tonight, we descend into the chilling true story of four friends who ignored a deadly warning and paid the ultimate price. Vortex Springs Tragedy. On the weekend of April 12, 1980, sunlight glinted off the crystalline waters of Vortex Springs in Holmes County, Florida, a popular diving site nestled in the Panhandle's lush wilderness. The spring's surface shimmered like liquid sapphire, but beneath that facade lurked a labyrinth of submerged tunnels and jagged limestone. Alongside a reputation so grim, locals called it the diver's graveyard. By 1980, Vortex Springs had already claimed 24 lives. Its neighbor, Morrison Spring, boasted an even deadlier tally: 28 fatalities. Yet, like moths to a flame, thrill seekers kept coming. Among them were four young men from Texas: Ronnie Tyner, Johnny Swan, Merritt Stagg Stagger, and Russell Hill. All in their early 20s, they arrived with open water certifications, boundless confidence, planned to explore the cave system. What they lacked was formal cave training, a detail that would prove fatal. Cave diving demands specialized skills, gas management, silt-out navigation, and the discipline to follow rules carved in blood. Vortex Springs had one ironclad rule: stop at the sign. The sign, a fluorescent marker bolted to the cave wall, loomed 250 feet from the entrance. Beyond it lay a maze of narrow passages, zero visibility zones, and currents strong enough to snap guidelines like thread. For non-certified divers, it was a boundary not to cross, but rules, as history shows, are often ignored. The group spent hours prepping gear, checking regulators, securing tanks, and debating their route. Witnesses recalled their laughter echoing across the spring, a stark contrast to the seasoned divers nearby who methodically rehearsed emergency drills. Tyner, the de facto leader, unfurled a spool of twine, a flimsy safety line meant to guide their return. Experienced cave divers use thick, weighted nylon lines resistant to tangles. Twine was a gamble, one they'd soon regret. At 10:17 a.m., they slipped beneath the surface. Bubbles fizzed upward as their fins churned the sandy bottom, silt clouds blooming in their wake. Sunlight faded rapidly, replaced by the ghostly glow of their dive lights. The water temperature plunged from 72 degrees Fahrenheit to a bone-numbing 55 degrees Fahrenheit as they descended. Their beams swept across ancient limestone walls, pockmarked by eons of acidic erosion. Small fish darted into crevices, fleeing the intruders. For the first 200 feet, the dive went smoothly. Then, the sign materialized, a glowing specter in the gloom. "Stop!" it commanded. This was their last chance to turn back. They didn't. Laying out twine behind them, the group pressed onward. The tunnel narrowed, ceilings dipping lower, walls squeezing tighter. Unseen currents tugged at their gear. At 300 feet, the twine snagged on a jagged outcrop. Swan, trailing the group, paused to free it, a delay that broke their rhythm. Minutes later, the line snapped entirely, recoiling into the darkness. Panic flickered, but Tyner motioned them forward. They'd find their way back. They had to. The twine snapped with a soundless twang, vanishing into the void. Without their lifeline, the divers were adrift in a maze of stone. Ronnie Tyner signaled the group to continue, his flashlight beam trembling slightly as it carved through the ink-black water. They swam deeper, their bubbles rising in frantic clusters. The cave's architecture grew more oppressive. Ceilings sloped downward, passages narrowed to shoulder width, and jagged limestone teeth threatened to snag their gear. Unknown to them, current had shifted. A subtle undertow, born from distant underground springs, began tugging them sideways. Merritt Stagger, lagging behind, kicked harder to keep pace. His fin clipped a rock, sending a plume of silt billowing into the water. Visibility dropped instantly. The beams of their dive lights reflected off the particles, creating a disorienting whiteout. Panic is a slow poison in cave diving. It starts with a skipped breath, a racing pulse, then spreads like wildfire. Johnny Swan, the youngest of the group, felt it first. His regulator slipped from his mouth as he hyperventilated, bubbles erupting around his face. Russell Hill swam to him, shoving the mouthpiece back between Swan's teeth, but the damage was done. Swan's thrashing stirred more silt, reducing visibility to zero. Now blind, the group fumbled for contact. Tyner grabbed Hill's arm. Hill clutched Stagger's tank, and Stagger reached for Swan, but Swan was gone. In the chaos, he drifted into a side passage. The twine coiled around his ankle like a serpent. He jerked, yanking the line taut. The others felt the pull. Tyner turned, his light sweeping over the chaos. What he saw froze him. The twine had woven itself into a nightmarish web, entangling limbs, tanks, and regulators. They were trapped in their own safety net. Above, on the sun sun-drenched boardwalk, concern simmered. By 2:30 p.m., the group had been underwater for over 2 hours, far beyond their planned dive time. Witnesses alerted park rangers, who mobilized a rescue team. Among them was Johnny Manuel, a grizzled cave diver with a reputation for retrieving the unrecoverable. Manuel suited up swiftly, his gear meticulously checked. Dual tanks, backup lights, a knife strapped to his calf. He knew Vortex Springs' tricks. At 3:07 p.m., he plunged into the spring, trailing a reinforced nylon guideline. The water clarity stunned him. Vortex Springs' upper reaches were pristine, sunlight filtering through like liquid gold. But as Manuel descended past 200 feet, the environment shifted. The limestone walls closed in, glistening with algae. 250 feet, he found the stop sign and the frayed remnants of twine. Beyond the sign, the cave yawned into darkness. He followed the twine's path, its cheap fibers fraying like cobwebs. Then he saw them. 4 figures, suspended in the water. Their bodies formed a grotesque tableau, limbs twisted, masks askew, eyes wide behind fogged glass. The twine bound them together in a macabre embrace, looping around wrists, ankles, and tank valves. Swan's hand clutched a rock, fingertips raw from clawing. Hill's regulator dangled uselessly, its mouthpiece bitten through. Most chilling, their knives remained sheathed. Manuel radioed the surface, his voice steady but grim. What happened in those final moments? Autopsies revealed no equipment failures. Tanks held residual air. Regulators functioned. The answer lay in psychology. The first theory, a panic spiral. Cave divers trained for touch contact, keeping a hand on their buddy's tank at all times. But when Swan kicked up silt, the group broke protocol. Separated and blind, they likely groped for each other, tangling the twine further. Nitrogen narcosis, though mild at this depth, may have dulled their critical thinking. Theory number 2, the current's betrayal. Vortex Springs' underground currents are unpredictable. A surge could have swept Swan into the side passage, dragging the others with him. The twine, never meant for stress, snapped under tension, but not before ensnaring them. The last theory focuses on the knives that weren't used. Fear, utter, crippling fear. Each diver carried a blade, yet none unsheathed it. Why? Fear paralyzes. In the blackness, with air dwindling, their brains likely fixated on escape, not solutions. The cave had taken their lives, and that was not a theory. It was a fact. As Manuel worked to free the bodies, a rock dislodged from the ceiling, striking his shoulder. Pain radiated down his arm, but he steadied himself. This cave doesn't discriminate, and composure at all times is key. Even rescuers aren't spared. Johnny Manuel surfaced with Russell Hill's body at 4:23 p.m., his shoulder throbbing from the cave's parting blow. Above, the spring buzzed with grim activity. Police divers, forensic teams, and a crowd of onlookers drawn by morbid curiosity. News vans lined the parking lot, cameras trained on the water. By nightfall, all 4 bodies had been recovered. Autopsies confirmed the obvious, drowning exacerbated by panic-induced oxygen depletion, but the why lingered like a shadow. Vortex Springs tragedy sent shockwaves through the diving community. Forums erupted with debates. Veterans blamed complacency. Newbies questioned their own limits. Dive shops in Florida's cave country tightened rental policies, demanding proof of cave certification. The National Speleological Society, NSS, revised its safety guidelines, emphasizing redundant gear, 2 lights, 2 knives, 2 cutting devices. Yet, as every experienced cave diver will tell you, gear does not replace judgment. Caves do not care about your certifications. Ronnie Tyner's parents donated his gear to the National Diving Museum, sealing it in a glass case labeled "The Price of Curiosity." Johnny Swan's sister launched a nonprofit, Safe Dive Initiative, lobbying for mandatory cave diving education in open water courses. Merritt Stagger's fiancée left Florida, unable to stomach the sight of water. Russell Hill's father, a retired Navy diver, spent years petitioning to seal Vortex Springs Cave permanently. Their grief underscored a brutal truth: underwater caves do not forgive. Unlike ocean diving, where surfacing is always an option, cave systems offer no escape hatch. A silt out becomes a death sentence. A snapped guideline strands you in a liquid hellhole, and panic amplifies every risk. While the Vortex Springs story unfolded, another horror brewed 400 miles north in the shadowy depths of Big Shoals Cave, Arkansas. The Big Shoals Cave tragedy, December 1981. Big Shoals Lake Cave, Arkansas. Nestled deep within the Ozark Mountains, this submerged labyrinth was no sun-drenched Florida spring. Its waters ran cold and opaque, stained the color of steeped tea by tannins leaching from decaying cypress roots. Sunlight died at the surface, snuffed snuffed out by a suffocating layer of algae. Below, jagged limestone walls twisted into narrow tunnels, their floors blanketed in silt so fine a single fin stroke could choke the water into blackness. Locals spoke of the cave in hushed tones, swapping stories of a monstrous catfish lurking in its depths, a 70-pound leviathan with eyes like saucers and jaws strong enough to snap a fishing rod. For one man, the legend became an obsession.
The diver, whose name remains shrouded in mystery, was no novice. 34, he held a National Association of Underwater Instructors certification, a gold standard in recreational diving. With 8 years of open water experience, he'd logged dives in Florida's reefs and Missouri's Clearwater Springs. But cave diving, that demanded a different skill set entirely. Redundant air supplies, guideline reels to mark escape routes, and always having a diving buddy.
Yet on the evening of September 26, 1981, the man arrived at Big Shoals alone. His gear reflected reckless confidence. A single aluminum 80 tank strapped to his back, a handheld flashlight with fresh batteries, and a fishing line strung with 5-pound catfish bait. No secondary air source, no knife to cut entanglement, no guideline reel to trace his path back. His plan was equal parts ambition and folly: to descend into the cave's deepest chamber, set his line, and lure the mythical catfish to the surface, a feat that would crown him a local legend. Witnesses later described him as calm, even jovial, as he waded into the lake. A group of campers watched from the shore, their fire crackling as dusk settled over the forest. At 6:45 p.m., he adjusted his mask, bit down on his regulator, and slipped beneath the surface. Bubbles fizzed upward, marking his descent. Then, silence. Big Shoals was no ordinary dive site. Its entrance, a submerged vertical shaft, dropped 40 feet before branching into a network of tunnels. Some widened into chambers the size of subway cars, others constricted to 18-inch crawl spaces, their ceilings studded with limestone daggers. The water temperature hovered at 50 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough to induce hypothermia within hours. But the greatest threat lay in the silt. Unlike Florida's sandy caves, Big Shoals' floors were coated in loess, a flour-like sediment deposited by ancient glaciers. Disturb it, and visibility vanished in seconds, erasing all sense of direction. Seasoned cave divers treated Big Shoals with reverence. They dove in teams, using weighted nylon guidelines and jump lines to navigate side passages. They carried redundant lights, backup regulators, and staged tanks for decompression. This diver carried none of that. Witnesses timed his disappearance, 6:45 p.m. By 7:30 p.m., the campers grew uneasy. No bubbles, no movement. One man waded into the shallows, shining a flashlight into the abyss. The beam dissolved into murk. By 8 p.m., they alerted park rangers. Rescue teams arrived by midnight. Leading the effort was William Bill Burns, a Missouri-based cave diver with a reputation for recovering the unrecoverable. Burns had pulled bodies from Florida's Devil's Eye and Missouri's Bonne Terre mine. But Big Shoals, in his words, it was a different animal. At dawn, Burns geared up, dual aluminum 80 tanks, a halogen primary light, and a reinforced nylon guideline reel. His team included Tom Cook, a Kansas City rescue diver, and 2 support swimmers. Their mission shifted from rescue to recovery. "If he's in there," Burns said, "he's not coming out alive." Burns descended at 7:12 a.m., his light cutting through the tannin haze. The entrance shaft yawned beneath him, its walls slick with algae. At 40 feet, the tunnel branched. Burns chose the eastern passage, a known catfish spot. The ceiling dipped suddenly, forcing him to crawl. His tanks scraped against limestone, the sound echoing like nails on a chalkboard. Then, he found the fishing line. It stretched taut into the darkness. The hooks still baited. No struggle, no torn line, just an eerie stillness. Burns radioed the surface, found his trail, proceeding. At 90 feet, the tunnel narrowed to 20 inches. Burns removed his tanks, pushing them ahead as he wriggled through. Sediment bloomed around him, reducing visibility to 0. He switched to touch navigation, fingertips tracing the wall. Suddenly, the line went slack. Ahead loomed a restriction, a jagged gap barely wider than a human torso. Burns squeezed through, his dry suit snagging on limestone. Then, catastrophe. A shelf above him cracked, raining debris. A rock gashed his forehead, blood clouding his mask. He backpedaled, yanking his guideline. "Abort! Cave's collapsing!" Tom Cook took over at 10:30 a.m. His team dove in pairs, tethered by safety lines. They reached the restriction Burns had fled, but the silt had settled. Cook inched forward, his light revealing a grim sight. The fishing line, snapped and frayed, dangling from a rock. Beyond it, the tunnel widened into a chamber. Hope flared until a diver's fin brushed the ceiling. Los exploded into the water, a whiteout so thick Cook's partner vanished at arm's length. They retreated, only to find their safety line tangled in a snag. Cook slashed it with his knife, surfacing with 300 psi left. Another diver, determined to push further, wedged himself into the restriction. As he squirmed through, a basketball-sized rock dislodged, pinning his leg. His scream echoed through his regulator. bubbles frothing as he thrashed. Cook's team hauled him up, his femur fractured, his wetsuit soaked in blood, and at 2 p.m., Cook called off the search. The cave had won. Decades later, the question still haunts. What exactly claimed him? Some speculate the fishing line, his own reckless design, snared his legs, or tank valve, pinning him to the cave floor as panic devoured his air supply. Others point to the silt, that ever-present menace. A single misstep could have churned the Lois into a blinding cloud, sending him spiraling deeper into the labyrinth until his tank gasped empty. Even equipment failure looms as a possibility, a flooded light drowning him in darkness, or nitrogen narcosis warping his judgment as he fumbled for a non-existent backup. But beneath these theories lies an uglier truth: hubris. This diver, seasoned in sunlit waters, believed open water skill could tame a cave. Big Shoals, with its silt-coated teeth and whispered legends, disagreed. To this day, the diver's body lies entombed in the cave. Park rangers occasionally find fishing lines snagged on rocks, ghostly reminders of a gamble that cost everything. The catfish legend endures, a dark punchline to a tragedy that never should have happened. The tragedies of Vortex Springs and Big Shoals have a chilling symmetry, their lessons etched not just in silt and stone, but in the patterns of human error. Both divers stared down explicit warnings. Vortex's fluorescent stop sign bolted at 250 feet, Big Shoals' local lore of vanishing acts, and dismissed them as hurdles for lesser minds. They traded caution for curiosity, treating safety protocols like suggestions scribbled in margins. Vortex's sign, a literal red line, became a dare. Big Shoals' whispered legends, mere campfire stories to outshine. Their gear choices read like a manifesto of hubris. At Vortex Springs, the thin, frayed twine, laughably inadequate, betrayed them, tangling into a death snare where weighted nylon lines might have held. At Big Shoals, a lone aluminum 80 tank dangled like a ticking clock, devoid of the redundancy cave divers demand. Dual regulators, staged bailout bottles, backup lights. Solo dives sealed their fates. Underwater caves punish isolation. No buddy to share air during a regulator failure. No second pair of eyes to spot a siltout's first swirl. Each is a death sentence on its own. Vortex's quartet, though a team, might as well have been alone. Their twine no substitute for the rule of thirds or touch contact protocols. The Big Shoals diver, truly solitary, vanished without a witness to his final thrash. In the end, both sites expose the same truth. Underwater caves demand humility, and they reward preparation. They annihilate ego. The diver's stories, though separated by miles and years, can be boiled down to a single, sobering statement: the water always wins. That said, cave diving has come a long way since the catfish catastrophe. Fatalities have plummeted since the 1980s, thanks to stricter training and technology. Rebreathers recycle exhaled gas, extending dive times. Trimix gas blends reduce narcosis. Underwater drones map tunnels in advance. But as the tragedies at Eagle's Nest and Dean's Blue Hole proved, innovation cannot eliminate risk. The families of Vortex Springs victims still gather annually, tossing flowers into the spring. Big Shoals remains closed to divers, its depths silent. Why do we share these stories? Not to sensationalize, but to honor the lost and to warn the living. Underwater caves are not playgrounds. They are temples of stone, governed by laws written in nitrogen and darkness. Respect them, prepare relentlessly, dive with humility.